Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're joined by Ken Timmerman, a New York Times best-selling book author and a contributor to Newsmax. Ken's new novel, St. Peter's Bones, will be released January 17th. It's a culmination of 3 years of research into the growing plight of persecuted Christians in Iran, Jordan, and Iraq. Ken, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on, Ashley.
Before we get to the book, potentially troubling developments in Lebanon. Hezbollah has pulled out of the government there. Now, you've covered the Middle East for decades as an investigative journalist. Tell us what this means for security in the region, and could it potentially lead to civil war?
Well, you know, Ashley, as I've reported at Newsmax during recent trips to Lebanon, there is a great deal of tension because of Hezbollah's involvement in the murder of the former Prime Minister, Rafiq Hariri, back in 2005. They are under investigation by the UN Special Tribunal for Lebanon, which is expected to hand down indictments in the coming days or weeks. When that happens, Hezbollah is threatening to launch a civil war, and their pullout from the government this week was the prelude to that possible conflict.
What does that mean for security in the region?
Well, the Israelis are certainly concerned, although I was just on the phone today with a former deputy director of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, and he believes that the Syrian government and the Saudi government, who invariably exercise some control over tiny Lebanon, will intervene to prevent an all-out war.
In your novel, St. Peter's Bones, you look at the history behind the oppression of Christians in Iraq all the way to the present day. Tell us about how you've created a story within the backdrop of actual historical events and the message you hope readers will take away.
I started out to write this as a nonfiction, and as you know, I've written many stories at Newsmax about what I found on the ground. But it's one thing to read news reports, and it's something else for a reader to get a sense of real live characters, of real live people who are suffering, who have families, who have histories. And so I wanted to create a story that would bring all of this alive to an ordinary reader. And that was the origin of St. Peter's Bones. I took an Iraqi Christian interpreter, and Lord knows I've met many of them, who worked for U.S. forces in Iraq. I made him the main character and let him tell the story of what it's like to live in Iraq today, what his experiences were working for the U.S. coalition. So this is a war story. It's a story about the war in Iraq. It's a love story. There's a young woman from the United States, a young Assyrian Christian woman who comes to Iraq on an aid mission. And, of course, it's a religious thriller about the St. Peter's Bones and where they might be. Are they in the Vatican or are they in modern-day Iraq?
Ken, in Egypt, tensions remain high after a New Year's church bombing killed 21 people. Now an off-duty Muslim police officer has shot and killed a Christian Egyptian on a train. Is this a sign that extremists are stepping up attacks on Christians?
I'm very worried about what's happening in Egypt, also Pakistan, Iran, as well as Iraq. When Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt, pulled back his ambassador on the 11th of January from the Vatican, this was a very dangerous signal. He was essentially telling Muslim fanatics in Egypt that it was an open season on Christians. The Pope had criticized the actions both of the Egyptian government in failing to restrain Muslims in Egypt and of the Muslim leaders themselves for failing to exercise control or influence over their faithful. So these attacks on Christians, I'm afraid, are going to multiply in Egypt unless the Egyptian government cracks down and makes it very, very clear that this is not tolerated behavior inside their country.
And there are reports that dozens of Christians have been arrested in Iran. An official from Tehran likened Christians in Iran to the Taliban. What should the international community be doing to stop this kind of persecution against Christians?
Well, first of all, Ashley, we have to realize that Christians are a persecuted minority in the Middle East. And the Middle East, let's not forget, is where Jesus lived his life here on earth and where Christianity itself began. You know, in the 3rd century after the death of Christ, there were something like 300 Christian bishops in North Africa alone. After Islam swept through the region in the 7th and 8th centuries, there were only 3 left. So we need to recognize that Christians are a persecuted minority. I believe that American Christians and churches here in this country should do everything they can to help through a variety of aid organizations.
You were nominated for the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize for your work in exposing Iran's nuclear weapons program. Is the U.S. taking a hard enough stance on Iran, and do you think Israel will eventually strike Iran to keep it from getting nukes?
Well, I do think that in the past couple of months, with the increase of U.S. sanctions on Iran, that is beginning to bite. I'm a bit concerned because President Obama waited 18 months before he would agree to the congressional sanctions, but they are finally there and they're finally in place and they're having an impact. As for the Israelis, they really do not want to attack Iran. It's the last thing they want to do. And they believe that the attacks by Stuxnet, this computer virus that I've written about at Newsmax, it's called a digital warhead. They believe that Stuxnet has done enough damage to the Iranian nuclear facilities that this has actually delayed their weaponization program by perhaps 2, maybe even 3 years. So the Israelis have hope that they have bought some time here. We don't know who is behind Stuxnet. But the Israelis are very happy to have seen it successfully attack the Iranian nuclear weapons program and are hoping that the Americans will not relinquish the pressure through sanctions and diplomatic isolation on the regime.
Thank you, Ken Timmerman, Newsmax contributor and author of the new novel St. Peter's Bones.
Thank you, Ashley.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.